Okay, welcome to Zwift Coaching Podcast number 15. I'm Matt Rowe here with Kev Poulton. How are you, Kev?
Yeah, good, thanks, Matt.
Top man. And we've also got a special guest, the winner of an Olympic gold at the last 3 Summer Olympic Games, Kristin Armstrong. Hi, thanks for joining.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Well, today's topic, the three of us can kind of delve into the topic of tapering. So tapering, according to the Oxford Dictionary and Google, means diminish or reduce in thickness towards one end. So broadly speaking, in cycling terms, by tapering, we mean reducing the training stress before an event that you want to perform well at. So guys, kicking off, what does tapering mean to you at a high level?
Well, for me, obviously you've touched on it there, Matt. We're reducing the stress, and that was a really good point there. So obviously we're coming into a key event and we're looking to, in some ways, recharge the body and get ready for a peak performance. And how we achieve that is through a very structured and calculated taper into that event.
Yeah, again, being the third one to provide the definition of taper, I guess, for myself, I look at tapering as probably one of the most critical pieces into what we're all trying to achieve, which is maximizing our performance on a single day or multiple days, which is, otherwise known as peaking. And I think it's a combination of both. How do we prepare our bodies, both physically and mentally, to be our best?
Yeah, we can't peak without tapering. So the two obviously go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah, in fact, when I was thinking about tapering a little bit more, I don't think there's very many times where I think of the two words tapering and peaking without having them together. So I actually had to personally really separate and define the difference between tapering and peaking, because to me it's one unit.
Yeah, and obviously it's that balancing act, between trying to be as fit as possible. So you don't want to do too little in a taper, but the aim being you're trying to become fresh. So that balance between not being fatigued, you can be super fit, but if the muscles are sore, essentially, and you're tired, you're going to be unable to perform. And I'm sure there's plenty of examples of how to get it right and how to get it wrong. And I think, and originally I kind of thought of taper as being a kind of a marginal gain, one of these sort of final pieces of the jigsaw that can really make a small difference. But I think actually it's a big gain. So if you get your taper wrong, you can do all the training, put all the hard work in over a period of weeks and months. You come to the final week and you overcook it. Or even undercook it, and you're going to put yourself out of the run-in come event day. I think some of these small increases in performance, by getting your taper right, can have a significant impact on performance outcomes, if you like. So you get your taper right or wrong, that can literally mean the difference between winning and losing, podium and no podium.
Yeah, well, Matt, I'm going to perhaps be a bit controversial and say that in the modern age of coaching and training, it's perhaps easier to get the taper correct now with all the metrics we have. So if you're providing your coach or yourself, you're tracking your data accurately, it's much easier in the modern age now to get that taper correct. Whereas in the past, before we had things like training peaks in today's plan and golden cheetah, we didn't have those metrics we were tracking as often. There was more guesswork in it. So it was a lot harder to get that taper correct, and there's a lot of guesswork involved there. And quite often what we would see happen there was athletes would come into their key event, their peak event, and perhaps train too hard or too little, and then after their event, when they have a rest period, people would then come out and say, oh man, I feel fantastic on the bike now, I've got some of my best performances, because they've in some ways had an accidental taper after their event. So I think now that we can quantify the stress of training and the intensity of training more accurately, it's in some ways a lot easier to get that taper correct.
Yeah, I would agree. I was asked quite often when I came back to the sport 2 different times, how did I know? Was I nervous when I came back to sport and I showed up to race like a national championships in 2015? And I went back to, like you said, using the software that's on the market today, such as, Training Peaks. And I was able to go back through history and look at all the data And so when I did show up, I knew exactly what I needed to do because I was able to upload data from my power meter. I was able to write in notes through kind of the diary style that we have. And it really helped me continue my career as long as I did, because it gave me confidence in knowing scientifically exactly what it took to be my best prior to coming out of retirement.
Yeah, that's a good example. Also now, I guess with this data and software, we now know how to make the most of each training session, how hard to make it, how easy to make it. And for me, one of the key points of tapering is avoiding detraining, because we know that it only takes 3 to 5 days of the incorrect training. If it's too easy, you're going to come into a state of detraining and lose your form. So with the metrics we have available now, it's a little bit easier to monitor the amount of intensity we put into a taper as well.
Yeah, and I think for even riders who perhaps don't log all their data in training peaks, and kind of have weeks, of significant training loads and then low training loads, I think just being even just simplistic with it. So for any of you listeners who haven't got a wealth of data, perhaps you're new to the sport, new to Zwifting, and you want to kind of just take just help prepare for an event maybe. It just simply reducing the volume, I think, is the first thing to go for me in a taper, and then intensity. So I always try and kind of maintain a bit of intensity, but reducing the overall volume, so the amount of time that you're riding for. What's your take on that, guys? Would you on the whole volume, intensity, or reduction of both?
Yeah, you've got the key point there, Matt, is to reduce volume. So intensity we maintain, and we're reducing volume. And the general theory is that we reduce volume by anywhere from 20 to 60%. And that depends on your key event. So if you're coming into a one-day event, if you're coming into a 3-week Grand Tour, then that percentage is going to change. But if you're reducing your volume from anywhere between 20 to 60%, that's about the right mark to aim for.
Yeah, I think what the key point I'm picking up on there, Kev, is that there's not a one-size-fits-all. Obviously, there's been so many variables in terms of a rider's training load, their level of fitness, years in the sport, what their goal is. Is this their number one goal that they're trying to peak and taper for well and above every other event? Or is it just a goal at the start of the year they want to kind of hit good form for? So yeah, there's a whole lot goes into this. But probably worth taking a couple of examples. So if we kind of said, let's perhaps, Kristin, you're probably the best person to start maybe a big event in your career, and just kind of talk us through what a good taper looked like, and maybe some of the pitfalls that you should be avoiding.
Yeah, I think that leading up to key events, especially when I look at a one-day event such as a one-day time trial or a one-day road race, personally for myself, over the years of competing, I find that a 2-week taper really works well for me. Prior to that 2-week taper, if we talk about what does that 3rd week before that taper look like, that's probably one of my hardest weeks. I'm able to go in, and I typically do a 5 to 7 day stage race, which I am going, that means back-to-back days on the bike at high intensity. So I have a high stress load on my body for 5 to 7 days, and then I take that stress load and my body begins to adapt. My body can't adapt without rest. And so if we want to really make gains from hard sessions, anytime we're on the bike, we have to allow our body to recover prior to getting back to work again. And so after these 5 to 7 day stage races, I would go into a day or two off, and then I'd have a couple days easy so that my body would take 4 or 5 days before I would do anything over, I would say, an hour and a half or 2. From there, I would begin building I call it kind of the endurance opener. That means I would just go out and ride, have a nice steady ride, no pressure. Now, again, we talked about decreasing volume and keeping the intensity. So after a stage race like that, it takes me 4 or 5 days to recover. But I know truly my body's not fully recovered, but yet it can handle some lighter load. to get my legs going again, I would do some, what I would call it, motor pacing, which would be higher speed behind a scooter, a car, or even sometimes when you don't have that access, I use kind of a slight downhill. And it's really, the purpose is to get your legs going. It's something that's not going to cause any more muscular damage to your body, because you still are thinking, how have I recovered from that really hard 5 to 7 day period? If you don't have a downhill, if you don't have a scooter, if you don't have any of that, then I can also add in a workout that I really like to do, which is kind of a high cadence workout, which I'm trying to get my cadence up well over 100 for 3 to 5 minutes at a time, and I rest. If you do that 3 to 5 times, you'll find that at the end of that session, even if it's an hour session riding on Zwift, you're going to find that you have an amazing kind of open feel again with your legs. They feel a little lighter. From there, I'll obviously integrate not much load again. I'll go into kind of an easier day, and the next day might look like high intensity. So I might do some 3-minute VO2s. Again, take an easier day, and I might arrive at my main competition a week before and recon courses, easy, and the next day again, maybe doing a threshold effort just up and over a climb that I want to make sure that I know what the feel is like getting up and over that crest in such like a race, like a time trial. So again, it's really going back to that theory of, depending on what your volume is, it's going to be very, very unique to each rider. You want to decrease that volume, and then you want to keep that intensity. That intensity, if you're out doing longer intensity sessions, you can always keep that intensity, and you want to cut that intensity back as well. So if you're used to going out and doing 5 or 6 5-minute efforts, maybe you want to go and cut it down to 4. So there's also ways you can cut the intensity to keep your body sharp. And I always say just kind of awake, making sure that you don't ever end up being flat while you're trying to peak for a particular event, and that's obviously the physical side of things. I think there are so many things that we need to do as athletes to perform well. I think a lot of times physically we do all these things well, and I think it's the 1%ers that I think always made the difference in my career.
Stuff. And is there any kind of pitfalls you think, or kind of any red flags, kind of if you were maybe 3, 4, 5 days out from the Olympic Games time trial? Any red flags that we're looking for that you would then adjust?
I think the biggest red flags that I see peers, I did it when I was much earlier in my career. One of the things that we don't want to do is we have to trust the process. And if the process is we're going to reduce our volume, and the week before we're going to reduce our volume even more, we have to trust that this is going to be okay. Because there are going to be times during this process that you're going to feel really awful. But you have to keep telling yourself that it's a good thing that I feel awful today, because in 3 days is when I'm supposed to feel good. But you do something where you just want to test yourself. Oh, I'm just testing myself. I just want to see if I feel good. And you get in a rut and you get in a routine for 4 days straight before your big event. And you go back and you look and you're like, wait a minute, I tested myself every day. And I see that with athletes I coach today. I saw that with myself early on in my career. And I'll look at what they've done, or I've ridden with them, and I'm like, hey, easy is easy. Make your easy days really easy days. Make your quality days really quality days. But don't have that plateau effect where you kind of have the easy day and you kind of have a hard day, but you don't want to overcook yourself, but yet you don't want to go too easy because it doesn't feel so good. So then we're riding the same and we're testing ourselves. And so that's what I think one of the biggest red flags is.
Yeah, I like that one, because I think it's a couple of days out from an event, people are, I think naturally you're looking for that reassurance. I'm only 3 days out, 4 days out. Now, do I feel good? And you do that little sprint up a hill or something just to check the legs, and it comes back what you said. Just trusting that process, and you're in deep at that point. If you're 3 days out from an event, you're not going to be able to turn it around massive relief, you feel great or not. You're committed to that process. So yeah, stick with it. I like that.
Also like the way you spoke about the mental part of things there too. That's obviously very important. And it reminded me of the recent training camp I was on in Andorra, where we're training for the Vuelta, which is currently underway. And for the riders, the big goal was to finish that last hard session from the big training block and start the taper. Mentally, they wanted to get that session out of the way. And it was like a huge relief, a huge weight off their shoulder that, okay, we've done the work. Now we can start the taper and we can sort of relax a little bit now, and training is going to be more focused to getting that peak performance. So the mental side of the taper is obviously a huge part as well, and something to factor into it.
Yeah, going into an event fresh mentally, so that mental taper is really important too, as we're saying. When you've had a couple of days where you've really backed off the intensity, you become hungry then for the fight, and you become hungry for the event and hungry for that pain. You're really up for it, as opposed to doing too much in the run up to your event, overcooking it a little bit, and you hit the event, a little bit tired, a little bit fatigued mentally. It just means you're slightly more likely to keel over going up a climb, and just kind of not quite dig just as deep. So going in mentally fresh is really important.
One thing I'd like to add is, because there is something that happens to your body when your body's not used to resting or tapering. You find that athletes will taper for their biggest event, like an Ironman, and they'll get sick. And I think that there's something to training and teaching your body and your mind to trust the process, to be okay with this, because it worked 3 months ago, it worked 6 months ago. And so I think there's something about that. To gain confidence physically, we go out and we race. How are we gaining confidence mentally to trust the process going into these one-day events? I think it's really important to also put yourself through that, even if it's on a partial kind of taper, just so your body doesn't go into shock, like, what are you doing to me? You're resting me. I'm not used to this.
Yeah, that's a good point. And basically the message is, practice your taper in training or before a smaller event to avoid mistakes. So avoid the body responding with patterns and things you don't want it to do, i.e. getting ill. So, and it's all part of, a taper is not quite to the extreme of a full-on taper, but, periodization helps us have little recovery periods, and you should be able to gauge in those recovery periods what your body responds well to, whether it's a lot of still maintaining a lot of intensity, or do you really not knock back the intensity similar to the volume, so you really rein in what you're doing, or do you respond well to just a small bit of rest, i.e. a couple of days? Do you really freshen up quick? But the message here is it's all about trial and error. Do too little and you get blocked. Do too much and you end up over fatigued, and you don't hit event day fresh enough. And Kristin, do you just want to talk us through, I guess, what you would do? I think we're agreeing that the day before an event is really important. Just want to talk us through what you may do before a big event. So the Olympic Games time trial. What did you do as your final session the day before?
So I actually changed this up as I got older. Mm-hmm. So as I was younger in my career, in my 20s and my young 30s, I would do openers the day before the event. So again, I might get behind my director's car or scooter to get that leg speed up, or I might actually do some high cadence drills. My goal always the day before was to do something to lift my heart rate, to move my legs quickly, but yet not to have any muscular fatigue at all. So never to be overgeared, never to do anything that would cause strength, any effort strength-wise, because I didn't want to damage anything I was doing. My whole goal was to get the blood flowing, get the legs moving. Part of it was actually get my mind going, mentally prepared. As I got older, that session became 2 days before. So if my race was on Saturday, that session became Thursday, and Friday was a very easy day. I was able to open up on the day of on Saturday still, but what I found was I actually did much better as I aged. not opening up in a harder session the day before. But that was just something I learned about myself. And I think that also speaks to really documenting, whether it's on your own diary on paper, whether it's on your own computer, or if you're working with a software package. I think it's really important to document what works for you, because this is where it becomes very unique to the rider or the racer, the runner.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was thinking just then is, those notes, those just words, get them down on pen and paper in your diary, wherever it is. Because, you think back a year ago, you never remember how you felt on that given day. Okay, you might know what you've done and what your day to look like, but those are sensations and how you felt. Unless you write it down, capture it, it ain't gonna stick in your mind for very long unless you've got a fantastic memory.
I think also too, Matt, it's important to note that for different events, the taper is obviously going to be slightly different in terms of how much we reduce volume and so on. So, for example, if the target event is a Grand Fondo over a few days, like Howard Route or something like that, you're probably going to have a bigger percentage of taper. You might be closer to 60%. So you come into it more fresh, so you have some room to move to accumulate fatigue. And that's the same principle into a Grand Tour as well. But whereas if your event is a criterium, where it's a 1 hour event, obviously the taper is going to be could be a lot less, where so the volume is going to be kept up a little bit higher as well as the intensity as well. So it's important to monitor those metrics and those sensations in training and adjust your taper accordingly.
Yep.
But also during that taper, the longer the taper, we also need to look at nutrition as well, and just touch on that quickly. It's important to reduce calorie intake as well, because we're reducing our volume and we're trying to also reach our peak race weight as well. So it's also important to look at our energy expenditure and also energy intake as well to make sure that's balanced.
Yeah, good point. In fact, I kind of had in my mind a couple of do's and don'ts of a taper. Under the don't column, I've got don't stress. So it's coming up to you're trying to taper, trying to prepare for your big event. No, don't stress about it. You're in that process, as we've all spoken about. Have confidence. So don't stress is kind of number one. And as we've always spoken about again, really, is don't be tempted to do that extra session or interval because you feel good type thing. Harness that strength and save it. And kind of under my do column, kind of the main do's was plan what you're going to do with your spare time to perhaps stop overthinking, and do get your bike serviced, those simple things, get your bike checked out, and plan your nutrition strategy. So that's what kind of got me thinking about this is nutrition off the bike, as you mentioned, Kev, crucially important, but also gives you a bit of time to plan your nutrition for the day as well.
Yeah. And I guess just to summarise the topic for our listeners and to make it quite clear, some of the key points we're looking at here for a taper are, we're looking at a taper over 8 to 14 days, thereabouts, depending on your event. We're going to reduce volume, but we're going to maintain intensity. And we haven't touched on the benefits, the physiological benefits of a taper, what's going to happen to our body during that period there. And for me, there's 3 key things we're looking to occur in the body. And we get enhanced red blood cell production, so that boost in VO2 and hemoglobin. We also get a huge increase in aerobic energy production, so we become more efficient in our energy production at an aerobic level. And we also get a much stronger muscle fiber contraction as well. And this is something that really isn't thought of quite often, but our muscles have a much stronger contractile force, which makes us more efficient as well. So that's some of the key benefits we're looking for. And as you mentioned there, Matt, definitely look at energy intake as well to make sure we're not going to gain weight over that 2-week period as well. And
I guess the key point as well is you need to have sounds a bit obvious, but you need to have obviously trained in order to be able to do a taper. So if you're someone who's riding 3 or 4 hours a week and you're perhaps going to do a 5-hour sportive challenge, tapering, you're not really going to get too much out of a taper. So if you're thinking, right, well, I'm used to riding 3 days a week, maybe 4 hours a week, and you suddenly reduce that volume, I would argue you're actually going to lose fitness and kind of the taper would have it kind of be counterintuitive. So I guess do you think there's a number or a volume of training that you need to be doing to warrant considering a taper?
If you're looking at data, if you're using Training Peaks or Today's Plan, all those platforms, the key metric to look at is ATL, that acute training load. That's the training over the last 7 days. And if you go back and look at your history and some of your peak performances, there should be a common figure of that ATL where you've had your best performances. And that's where you can use your training intensity to aim for that figure. It's going to be different for everybody, but using the figure of ATL, acute training load, you can adjust your training to get to that right point. And in some ways it's taken a lot of the guesswork out of the taper, especially how much intensity to involve in your training as well.
You also mentioned, when somebody is doing low volume throughout the week, and their hours are low, I think that I work with athletes who are going to university full time. And so sometimes, though that volume's not high, no matter what, when they're going into an event, if they have low volume that week and they have high intensity in training or work or studies, I think that can accumulate to fatigue. And so I think that as you work with, whether you work with a coach or you are just working with yourself and you have a diary, I think it's really important to write down, really, we can look at the physical training, but you also have to look at what that week in your life looks like for those who are trying to balance life, balance school, balance family, and also balance training. And so that tapering, just to get that mental freshness before your event, it may need to be still decreasing just the amount of, I would say, additive stressors that are coming in, whether it be going out to dinner with your friends that night or meeting someone at the park just to meet them at the park. So some of those life things that are really grabbing our attention may have to be removed. And maybe that is considered part of a taper for someone trying to balance just life. And
Kristin, definitely sleep. Sleep is huge, isn't it, during that week?
Yeah, that point about sleep curve is, huge. And it's if you don't get enough sleep, you're not quite rested enough. And that kind of adds then to all the other life stresses we have, work, family and the like. And it's not just the stress we do on the bike, it's the off the bike stress, all counts up and all amounts to, body stress and kind of a stressful or physical toll on you as a person. So if in your taper, you've got some unexpected outside or off bike stresses, such as in the family, but and the like, then, that should be factored in and considered as part of your taper. So perhaps it's worth reducing some of the volume even further. Because say you've got a day that you come home from work and you're really, really tired, you've had a stressful day and there's stuff to do in the night. Is there value in squeezing in that shorter session 5 days out from your event? Or you're better off saying, you know what, I've had a really busy day, I'm really tired, I'm going to get an early night and skip cycling on the head altogether. This part of the final preparation is all about freshening up, and 5 6 days out, a week or so out, I would probably advise, kind of really be aware of the external pressures around your cycling.
Yeah, Matt, I just wanted to provide some examples of how we taper for a multi-stage event as opposed to a one-day event. And the same principles apply to any user, whether you're a professional, amateur, a new rider, weekend warrior, whatever. It's the same principles for all riders. I guess, and that's probably my key point here, is that we talk about elite riders and their taper, but it's the same principles apply to all riders. So in the examples here, in training for a 3-week Grand Tour or a multi-stage event, we generally put in place a 10-day taper. But for a peak one-day event, we generally go for a 6-day taper. So it really highlights you don't need that long a taper. And my concern is always the athlete coming into a state of de-training where they're going to lose their form. So what we've found over the years is that leading into A Grand Tour, 10 days is enough, and for a one-day event, 6 days is enough. But I wanted to provide the example of the taper for a one-day event, and the same thing applies for any rider here. So this is a 6-day taper, and this is an example that the riders use in the classics during the year. So we're basically reducing our volume by about 20%, so it's not a huge reduction in volume. On the first day of the taper, we have a low-intensity endurance ride. The second day, we have a day off. And then the third day here, and this is where Zwift is ideal for anyone in a taper, whether you're a professional or amateur. We do our intensity on Zwift. And the reason why we do that is because it provides a closed environment, good structure, and good control over the session as well. Day 4 is also intensity, but it's longer tempo type efforts. Day 5, we do a simple recovery ride of about 1 hour to 90 minutes. And then on day 6, the day before the event, we do the pre-race session, or the openers, as Kristin called it. And that's where we do a couple of 5-minute builds up to threshold, with good recovery in between. And we also do some 10-second sprints. And interestingly, over the years with these 10-second sprints, we've had riders hit their peak 10-second power for the year in this pre-race session. And that comes back to my point about one of the key aspects of a taper is that increased contractile force of the muscles. And this is just evidence of those changes that are occurring there. And it's also good confidence for the rider when they see this peak value the day before their race, that the taper has had the desired effect, and they're ready to go from there. And also throughout that 6-day period, always looking at nutrition on each of those days and making sure that we're balancing energy output for energy input as well.
Yeah, what better way to give you a rider confidence than see some personal records in Training Peaks or something? Yeah, fantastic. That's a sure way to know you've got your taper right.
You know, the last thing I would add, I think I mentioned this earlier on. I would say that I can't stress enough the importance. You can nail the taper physically, but prior to going into your taper, you have to listen to your body. The athlete is the only person who knows truly what they're feeling. And I think the communication, the honesty with yourself, the honesty with your coach or whoever's guiding you is really critical. Because if you arrive at that taper time 10 days before your event or 6 days before your event, and you haven't been honest and you've already dug yourself deep into kind of the point of no return, the taper is not going to work anyway. And so at the end of the day, I think that if you can listen to your body and be really true to yourself, you're going to come out on top, no matter what it is you're going after.
Yeah, I guess it all comes back to that starting point of your taper. So you talked there about honesty in your feelings there, and with your coach as well. So I guess you really need to evaluate how hard have you trained up to the event before you start your taper, and if everything has gone to plan and you've had a lot of stress on the body and a lot of adaptation, then obviously the taper is going to be much bigger in some ways. But if training has been a bit haphazard, missed a few days here and there, then the taper is going to be obviously a little bit different with a bit more volume and intensity in it. So I think evaluating your training leading up to the taper is a huge point as well.
Yeah, and obviously one thing that's unavoidable obviously is becoming ill. So ill, if you're injury, sickness and that type of thing. Yeah, if you've been lucky enough to become ill maybe 3 or 4 weeks out from your target event, by the time you ideally would be starting your taper, chances are you're not at the position you want to be. So that's going to reduce the length of your taper, and you have to kind of almost get a micro training block in almost. So if 2 weeks to go, you spent the previous 10 days off the bike, you're gonna have to get going again and do some sort of training and generate some stress before you think about tapering down for your own event. And I guess being brutally honest, the chances of really performing at your absolute best are probably gone out the window. If you had kind of a couple of weeks of illness, kind of a month out from the event, you're gonna have to kind of make the most of a bad situation. And again, a lot of that comes down to communication with if you're a professional rider, teams and coaches. If you're an amateur, just being honest with yourself. If you're if your big target sportif or event is coming up, but you've been ill recently, it may be a case of reestablish some new goals, give yourself some new goals. If you're an amateur, you're not paid to do the stuff. It's all about just doing what you're going to get the most satisfaction out of. And if satisfaction comes from performing well and putting a good shift in, it may be worth thinking, right, being honest with yourself, and perhaps if you've got a coach, being honest with your coach, just to make sure you're going to enjoy what you're doing and get what you want out from that event. So the session we're going to attach to this podcast is Kristin's opener session that you can do before your target event. And it basically involves 3 5-minute ramps, all done at a high cadence. And we're going to ramp from zone 3 to zone 4. So we're going to just touch on threshold. We're going to really focus on getting the blood pumping, and we're going to limit the muscular damage by ensuring we're pedaling at a high cadence. So this session is going to be done, or the efforts are going to be done at 90 revs a minute or higher. So again, Kristin mentioned she might go out and do this on the road, motor pacing, but you can replicate that indoors on Zwift by pedaling quickly. So that's going to be the session for this podcast that you can download and have a go at, guys. Next part is cycling terminology. So Kev, you're on the button, mate. You've got 30 seconds to describe the term. Just checking, you ready?
I'm ready.
Good man, okay. 30 seconds to describe the term full gas.
Full gas. Oh, that's an easy one. This is just maximal effort over any given duration, and it's normally quite messy. So if you're asked to go full gas for 10 seconds, you're all over the bike, giving it everything. Or if you're asked to go full gas for 20 minutes in a time trial, again, it's a bit untidy. You're giving everything you've got, maximal effort. It's basically leaving everything out there for full effort, full gas, without using the same word, but it's everything you've got out, left it on the road.
Good man. 30 seconds on the nail. Good man. And say absolutely 100% effort. I hate to talk about Greg when he's not here, but he did disclose it on a previous podcast when he tried that hard, he fell off the turbo. I mean, I guess he was riding full gas then, right?
That's full gas. That's a good example.
Full gas. All right, got a quick fire question, guys, so we can all offer a view on this one, and it's a very simple one. It is front wheel riser block on the turbo or not? That's
a definite yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to say yes as well. However, I never used to use one, and it's made the difference in the type of effort that you make and the different muscles that come into play. That's fine with a block, especially a big block and your front wheel. I've got a Cyclops one that's got kind of, I think, 3 or 4 different options. When you've got your wheel the highest, you definitely feel your glutes and your hamstrings kind of coming into play a bit more, obviously simulating climbing.
Yeah, and that opens up a whole different topic on bike position for indoor training, doesn't it? I know a lot of people when they first start to do a high volume of training indoors, they're changing saddles, position of saddle, moving it forward, back from the bottom bracket, handlebar heights. A lot of changes can occur. So that's probably a podcast in itself, bike position, indoor training.
Yep, absolutely. Well, there we go. Three yeses for the front wheel riser. Okie doke. We move on now to the Q&A section. So first up, we got a question from Terry Steer that we received via Facebook. And the question goes, or the message goes, thanks for an awesome podcast. I've learned so much from it. Very kind words and always nice to hear. And firstly, let me say that training on Zwift really works if you follow the programs. My wife did Kevin's 4-week FTP builder and went from an FTP of 133 up to 181 over the month. Not bad for a runner who thought she might try cycling. Absolutely. I've been cycling for a bit over 3 years now. I'm 51 years old, 58 kilograms, and I have an FTP of 250 watts. And I'm a lot more of a climber than a sprinter. I train for 8 to 10 hours a week. My question relates to building power on efforts less than 5 minutes up to 2 or 3 minutes, where I think my power is poor. My 5-minute power is 5.6 watts per kilo, which I think is okay for an old skinny bloke. 2 minutes is 6.3 watts per kilo, and 1 minute is 7.8 watts per kilo, with the 30-second power being 9.7 watts per kilo. And Terry's saying he thinks his longer power is okay, but short power is lacking for the styles of racing he's doing. And then most of the racing Terry does is crit or circuit racing. Then there just aren't many of the more suitable road or climbing races near where he lives. And the question really boils down to, is it possible for me to build short power at my age and physical build, or am I resigned to being a skinny, expletive climber?
First of all, it's good to hear that he's enjoyed the program and seen some good progress there. So well done, Terry. My first thought with that one is looking at his age. He's 51 and he's looking to gain power. Is he in the gym? So any male over the age of 30 or 35 needs to be in the gym, because unfortunately we're losing muscle mass, muscle fibers as we get older. So for an older male to maintain power or even gain power, we need to be doing strength work, gym work to address that issue there. So that's my first, I guess, feedback for Terry there, is to get into the gym. And then secondly, there's just no getting away from the fact you need to get in there and repeat those efforts, those 2 to 4 minute efforts that he talks about, those power efforts. But look at the cadence that he's producing the power at. So if he's training indoors on Zwift, he can actually obviously set the session to be a certain cadence to target certain muscle fibers, and you can also then make some gains in strength that way. So yeah, my two tips there are to get in the gym and look at the cadence that he's producing the power at, and try and in some ways, I guess, decrease the cadence a little bit to make it more powerful for the training effect. And then when he goes out on the road, try and ride at a higher cadence for those power outputs out on the road.
Agree with all that good stuff. And essentially, you get good at what you practice, what you train. So try some efforts in do efforts in zone 5, zone 6. Do a lot more intense efforts that are shorter and more repeatable, and that is gonna help you with those sharper efforts. And the bad news is, Terry, they hurt, but they're going to give you what you want. You'll be able to produce a lot more power for those shorter durations, get up the climbs quicker, and I'm sure you'll get a lot more out from your cycling, being a more punchy rider. Next question is from Lewis Henderson via Twitter, and Lewis is saying, "Hi guys, a few guys in my cycling club have been talking about their power zones, which I think I understand. Where I get lost is when the talk goes on to talking about energy systems. Talk to me about energy systems basics, please."
Whoa, this is a big one this is a month worth of podcast in itself. Energy systems, that's huge.
Basics, Kev. Basics.
The basics. Okay, so basically there's 3 types of energy systems that we focus on in training, and they are the ATP PC system, and that's where the fuel for that system is phosphocreatine, and it's suited to efforts up to about 10 seconds. So your 200 meter sprints, the first energy source is phosphocreatine, and the energy system is this ATP PC system. Second system it's got a few different names, this one sometimes, but it's basically the anaerobic glycolysis system. It's sometimes referred to as lactic acid system as well. And here the fuel we use for this system is glucose, and the type of effort that we use for this one, it's up to about 2 minutes. And I guess an example of this system being used is riding up a short steep hill out on the road, up to 2 minutes. And the third system is the aerobic system. This is where we're using carbohydrates and fats, sometimes protein, after a really long ride. And as it suggests, very long efforts, 40k time trials, long alpine climbs, long days in the saddle. So in a nutshell, that's the 3 energy systems, and that's what all of our training is based on, making those 3 systems the most efficient that we can.
Yeah, of course, those energy systems aren't turned on and off. They're always, all 3 energy systems are used to varying degrees. So even when you're doing a 10-second, 15-second sprint, you're still using all 3 energy systems, although it is pretty much the ATP energy system that's being used predominantly, Kev, right?
That's the key word. I was going to say that predominantly the energy system. So They're always working in unison, the 3 of them, but one of them is the more dominant over the other ones. Good point.
Next question. So again, hopefully that covers that for you, Lewis. Next question is asking, what is the best route or workout to get 5+ continuous hours on Zwift? I need to do this for an Ironman, training long rides. Thanks. I need to keep my head together for this. The rain is forecast for my regular Sunday long ride. And this question's from Michael Iron Mountain, sent in via Facebook. 5 hours. That's a hell of a stint. I think for me, I'd jump on Watopia and do the mega pretzel. So it's 107 kilometers. Never done it myself, so easy for me to say. But yeah, I think that's the longest route on Zwift, and that's going to keep you going for a while. Plus, there's lots of variations in Watopia, so you can kind of keep chopping and changing your route.
What's the 4 horsemen one? That's the long one too, isn't it?
4 horsemen.
I think it's got the 4 big climbs in it. It's not as long as the one you mentioned, but if you're looking for a climbing one, the 4 horsemen route is a good one as well.
There you go. If you're a fit rider and you really are gonna be traveling quickly in this 5 hours, you might be able to do the pretzel and the 4 horsemen. That'll be a fair day out.
But this also leads on to the other question about how long the longest rides are that people have done on Zwift, and we see a lot of guys have joined the 200 kilometer club on Zwift, which is quite incredible.
Oh, I done 100 kilometers for the first time on Zwift yesterday, actually. Exactly with my
incidentally,
yeah, with my brother-in-law. He was actually a bet that he lost, and he had to ride. The bet was basically if he lost, he had to ride 100 kilometers on a bike, and he were going to go out and do it on the road. He's a little bit nervous about it as he doesn't ride a bike. So I told him about Zwift, and that was a decision made. He borrowed my bike, borrowed my shoes, jumped on Watopia and got the job done. Not an issue. So
100 kilometers, well done.
Yeah, very well done. All right, next question is from Lewis Clarkson, and Lewis is asking, or he's saying, to erg or not to erg, and what should I set my trainer difficulty to? So I guess there's two parts to this. I'll jump in and go for the first one, the first half. And it's just to kind of confirm what we mean by erg mode. I think most Zwifters will be familiar, but just to confirm, all these smart trainers like your Wahoo Kicker and the Cyclops Hammer, etc., include a load restricted mode called erg mode, where the resistance is automatically adjusted for you. So you simply have to turn the pedals and produce the required power. So, and for me, it kind of takes the guesswork away from your training. So for me, it's a reason why erg mode wins. But you also need erg mode to kind of get the feel of the gradient changes in Zwift. So I think for me, from a training point of view, put erg mode on, as it just takes the thinking out of it and just forces you to do just to get the work done. And the second part of the question, I know you've spoken about this before, Kev, is about whether the trainer should be where the trainer difficulty should be set to.
Yeah, well, this is hugely individual, this one, in terms of erg or not to erg. I'm a big fan of erg, but it's just amazing how adamant the people are that they're right about this one, which is better. For me, as long as they're on there getting the work done, whatever motivates them to get the work done, I'm fine with. I'm like you, Matt. I like the idea of taking the guesswork out of it. No gear changes, just get on there and pedal, get the work done. That way, when you're suffering, you can put your head down, not have to worry about holding a certain power because you know it's doing it for you. But then I have some riders that absolutely despise erg mode, and they want to be able to change gears like they do out on the road, move around on the bike a little bit more, out of the saddle, and have to chase the power. They prefer it that way as well. But for me, whatever motivates them to get it done, I'm happy for that to happen. But when it comes to trainer difficulty, I'm adamant, 100%. It's got to be 100%, so you actually feel what the road's like. So it's more realistic that way. I'm a big fan of 100% for trainer difficulty. It's funny though, Matt, how when you ask the question about to erg or not to erg, people are very passionate about their decision and that they're correct, and it's their way or the highway in some ways, isn't it?
Well, we've all kind of gone for the erg sides. There's probably a few people listening violently disagreeing, and fair play, each to their own. It's all it's very, very personal. So as long as you're getting the work done, as we said, and as long as you're in workout mode, collecting those stars as you go through, hitting the right zones, producing the right power, then just do whatever works for you. Lovely. Well, that wraps up Coaching Podcast number 15. Kev and Kristin, thank you very much for your time. Been great chatting. Speak to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And thanks for joining us, Kristin.